Mom's dying words led me to a safety deposit box that changed everything. When Mom was lying in hospice during her final days, I thought I would soon become a complete orphan. Dad had died in a car accident when I was 3, and now cancer was taking Mom. But during one of those agonizing nights when morphine barely helped with the pain, Mom suddenly grabbed my hand with unexpected strength and whispered words that made me question everything I knew about our family. "Lisa, everything was a lie. My life was a lie, and yours too." At first, I thought it was hallucinations from the medication, but Mom's eyes were clear, filled with some desperate determination. She looked at me as if trying to convey 30 years of untold secrets in a single glance. She spoke in fragments, gasping between words. Our real last name wasn't Riley. We had been living under false names for 32 years. Your father didn't die in a car accident. At First National Bank, there's a safety deposit box number 247, where all the answers to questions I didn't even know I should ask are waiting. Mom was too weak to explain everything. She just kept repeating that the key to the box was hidden where she had taught me to hide my most precious things, asking if I remembered. But I didn't understand what she was talking about. What hiding places? What false names? 3 days later, Mom died, taking the explanations with her. I was left with fragments of an incredible story that my husband Brad categorically refused to believe. He thought the poor woman was just delirious in her final moments. The kids saw how I was suffering from the loss, but they didn't understand that besides grief for their grandmother, I was tormented by doubts about whether what she told me was true. But Mom's words wouldn't leave me alone. I wandered around the house, trying to solve the riddle about the place where you hide the most precious things. I checked all her jewelry, documents, books. I looked in every drawer, went through the contents of closets. Nothing resembling a safety deposit box key. Brad watched my searches with pity and irritation. He thought I was going crazy from grief, inventing puzzles and mysteries where there were none. But I couldn't stop. Something in Mom's gaze, in the strength with which she squeezed my hand, told me this wasn't the delirium of a dying woman. On the 4th day after the funeral, when I was once again going through Mom's things, it hit me. As a child, Mom had indeed taught me to hide my most important things. My childhood treasures, beautiful stones, notes from friends, small toys, we would put in an old tin cookie box and hide it under a floorboard in the pantry. Mom said real treasures should be hidden so no one would accidentally find them. My heart raced as I ran to the pantry. The floorboard was indeed slightly raised, as if it had been recently disturbed. Underneath lay that same tin box, but now instead of childhood trinkets, it contained a small key with the number 247 and a note. "Lisa, if you're reading this, it means I found the courage to tell you the truth before I died. Forgive me for all these years of deception. In the box are documents that will explain who we really are and why I was forced to lie to you about your father. You have the right to know the real story of our family." My hand trembled as I held that key. Such a small piece of metal, yet behind it were hidden answers to questions I didn't even know I needed to ask. I showed the discovery to Brad. He turned the key over in his hands for a long time, read and reread the note. Gradually, the skepticism in his eyes was replaced by anxiety. Brad cautiously suggested that maybe Mom was right, that everything wasn't as it seemed. But this might not be the story I wanted to hear. What if Dad had simply abandoned us. Run away from responsibility, and Mom had spent her whole life hiding the shameful truth that the man had betrayed her. This thought pierced me like a knife. Indeed, what if the box contained divorce papers, evidence that Dad had left for another woman, and Mom had spent her whole life hiding this shameful story behind a fairy tale about a car accident? What if instead of a tragic loss, I was facing a banal story of betrayal? Brad suggested not stirring up the past. Mom had lived with this secret her whole life. Maybe she wanted to take it with her to the grave and only spoke because she was delirious? For several days I hesitated. The key lay on the kitchen table, and every time I passed by, I felt its silent reproach. Brad didn't insist, but I could see relief in his eyes. He hoped I would abandon this venture. But curiosity proved stronger than fear. Even if the truth turned out painful, I couldn't live peacefully without knowing it. Mom had entrusted me with this secret, and I was obligated to see it through. The next day, I went to First National Bank. The clerk checked my documents, confirmed that I was listed as the heir to the box, and escorted me to the vault. The key fit perfectly. Inside the box lay a small container, and when I opened it, I saw a life I had never known. Documents in the name of Morgan instead of Riley. My parents' marriage certificate with completely different names. My own infant passport under the name Lisa Morgan. Photos of a family in a house I didn't remember. Happy parents with a little girl in their arms. And at the very bottom of the box, a thick folder with an FBI seal and the inscription, Witness Protection Program. My hands shook as I opened the first page. What I read turned my understanding of my own life upside down. My father, David Morgan, had witnessed the contract killing of a federal prosecutor in Boston in March 1991. His testimony sent 3 hitmen from organized crime to prison. After that, our family began receiving threats, and the FBI offered the only way out, the Witness Protection Program. But the most terrible discovery awaited me on the next page. For maximum security, it was decided to separate the family forever. Dad was relocated to Texas under a new name. Mom and I were sent to Oregon with documents under the surname Riley, and so that no one would try to find each other and endanger everyone else, each side was told that the other had died in a car accident. In the folder was the phone number of Agent Jennifer Cole, with a note that the program was completed in 2023 and contact could be made for family reunification. The last line in the file stated that the last of the convicted had died in prison, and the threat to the Morgan family no longer existed. When I returned home with these documents, Brad understood from my face that Mom had been telling the truth. We sat at the kitchen table while I laid out photos and papers before him, proof of a life I had never known. Emily and Jake were doing homework in the next room, not suspecting that their mother's world was crumbling and rebuilding anew. Brad looked at my parents' wedding photos, at the FBI documents, at my childhood pictures in an unfamiliar house. Gradually, the skepticism in his eyes changed to amazement, and then understanding of the scale of what had happened to our family. The next day, I called Agent Cole. When I introduced myself as Lisa Morgan, daughter of David and Dorothy, silence reigned on the other end of the line. Then the agent said they had been waiting for my call for 6 months since the program was officially completed. The agent confirmed the entire story outlined in the documents. But most importantly, she delivered news that changed everything. My father was also looking for ways to contact us through the Marshal's services. He was alive, living in Dallas under the name Peter Johnson, and had also recently learned he could begin searching for his family. But in 32 years, he had managed to build a new life. He had remarried, had a wife, Karen, and 12-year-old twin sons. The agent warned that his current family knew nothing about the past. All these years he had lived hiding that he once had another wife and daughter. When the agent arranged our first phone conversation, I didn't know what to say to a person who was my father, but remained completely unfamiliar. How do you talk to a ghost from the past? The voice on the phone trembled with excitement and disbelief. Dad couldn't believe it was true at first. For 32 years, he had considered us dead, and the sudden news that we were alive seemed impossible. But when I told him details that only our family remembered, how he pushed me on swings in the yard with the white fence, how we fed ducks in the park, how he sang me a lullaby about a princess, Dad cried. For 32 years, he had prayed for our souls every day. Every year on the anniversary of our death, he would go to church and light candles for the repose of his wife and daughter's souls. Every time he saw a girl my age, his heart would clench with pain. That's what his daughter could have been like if she had survived. When I told him that Mom had died a month ago, Dad sobbed like a child. He had lost her twice, first thinking she had died in a car accident, now learning that she was really dead and he would never see her again. But for his current family, this news was a real shock. Karen, his wife for 24 years, felt deceived. Her entire married life, she had lived with a man who was hiding that he had another family. The twins, Alex and Sam, couldn't understand how they suddenly had an adult sister whose existence they knew nothing about. Dad tried to explain about the witness protection program, about the prohibition against talking about the past, but Karen still felt she had lived a quarter century with a stranger. Who was he really, Peter or David? And whom did he love more? His first family or his second? We planned the meeting very carefully. Denver, neutral territory between Portland and Dallas. Agent Cole agreed to be present for support. I had no idea what to expect from meeting a person I remembered only as a 3-year-old child. When Dad entered the hotel room, I didn't recognize him at first. Before me stood a gray-haired man of about 60, with tired eyes and a mechanic's hands. The wrinkles on his face told the story of a difficult life. But when he smiled, I saw that young man from the childhood photos, the one who once pushed me on swings and called me princess. He brought with him an old suitcase, and when he opened it, it seemed like time stopped. There lay the things he had secretly kept for 32 years, thinking they were all he had left of his dead family. My teddy bear that I slept with at age 3. Children's drawings I had made for Daddy with crayons. A lock of my hair cut on my 2nd birthday. A little dress I wore the last winter in Boston. Emily and Jake cautiously got acquainted with the grandfather they had considered dead their whole lives. He showed them photos of their mother as a child, told them what I was like, stubborn, curious, how I loved ice cream and was afraid of thunderstorms. The children listened, spellbound. For them, these were stories about an unfamiliar mother, one they had never known. Dad told me his version of that terrible night in March 1991. How he was doing his usual building rounds and heard shots from the parking lot. He looked out the window and saw 3 men shooting at a person near a silver car. One of the killers looked up and stared directly at the window where Dad stood. Their eyes met for an instant, but it was enough to change our lives forever. When Dad came home that night, he was pale as death. Mom understood something terrible had happened. He told her what he had seen, and she immediately realized we were in for big trouble. Mom begged him to forget about everything, pretend he had walked away and seen nothing. Why get involved in other people's business? Why endanger the family for a stranger? But Dad couldn't act against his conscience. The murdered prosecutor was a father of 2 children. He had a wife waiting for him at home. How could he let killers go unpunished? Mom cried, sensing trouble, but understood if she forced her husband to stay silent, he would never forgive himself. The next day, Dad gave testimony to the FBI. He identified all 3 from photographs. His testimony became key evidence in the case against a major criminal organization. Mom was right. Within a week, the nightmare began. Anonymous calls with detailed descriptions of what they would do to his 3-year-old daughter. Surveillance near the kindergarten. An attempted break-in of our apartment. A car that slowly drove down our street at night. Mom blamed herself for not being able to dissuade her husband. But Dad said the price of silence would have been even higher. He couldn't have lived knowing he had allowed killers to escape punishment. The truth cost us everything, but he couldn't have acted differently. The FBI was straightforward, either the witness protection program or death for the entire family. When Dad agreed, no one warned him about the most terrible condition. The marshals explained that for maximum security, the family needed to be separated forever. Different states, different names, different lives. And so that no one would try to find each other and endanger everyone else. Each side would be told that the other had died in a car accident. The marshals organized a staging. Newspaper articles appeared about 2 tragic accidents in different states. In one, Dorothy Morgan and her 3-year-old daughter Lisa died. In another, David Morgan. They even held real funerals with closed coffins, attended by friends and colleagues. Neither Dad nor Mom knew the other side was alive. Each of them thought they had lost their family forever. Dad thought Mom and I had really died in a car accident. Mom thought her husband had been killed or died from grief. For 32 years, each of them mourned the dead, not knowing that their loved ones were alive on the other side of the country. Dad said it was the hardest decision of his life, agreeing to lose us so we would stay alive. He chose our safety over his own happiness. And then he was told that we had died in a car accident, a week after his relocation. He believed this lie and considered us dead for 32 years. So I grew up sincerely mourning a father who had died when I was 3. Every year, on the anniversary of his death, Mom and I would go to the cemetery in Boston, where a grave with David Morgan's name stood. The marshals had organized the burial of an empty coffin to make the staging complete. I would lay flowers on the grave and tell Dad about my school successes, friends, and dreams. Mom also cried at that grave, but her tears were special. She wasn't mourning a dead husband, but a living person she had lost forever. She didn't know if he was alive, where he was, if he was happy. The marshals gave no information about other program participants. Actually, Mom mourned not only her lost husband, but the life stolen from her. She was a young woman when we were relocated, could have remarried, had more children. But how do you start new relationships when officially you're a widow, but actually don't know if your husband is alive somewhere in another state? Several times over the years, men approached Mom. Good, decent people who could have become my stepfather. I remember Robert, Mom's colleague from the hospital, a kind doctor who often came to our house, brought me gifts, patiently explained school math. Mom glowed in his presence, and I dreamed he would become my new daddy. But every time relationships became serious, Mom found reasons to end them. Robert worked too much. Another candidate, teacher Michael, was too young. A third, widower Jim, was too serious. I didn't understand when Mom pushed away people who made her happy. Now I know. She simply couldn't betray a person who was living somewhere and possibly also waiting for a reunion. Every attempt to start new relationships broke against an invisible wall of loyalty to a husband she thought might be alive. Mom often got up at night and looked out the window for a long time. I thought she just suffered from insomnia. Actually, she was looking for a star in the sky that she had chosen as Dad's symbol. Every night she mentally talked to that star, told it about my school successes, about how I was growing, what I was becoming. When I turned 16, Mom suddenly asked if I wanted to change my last name. She said Riley sounded too simple and a girl needed a beautiful surname. Then it seemed like a strange idea, but now I understand. She wanted to return my real name to me, prepare me for possible reunification with Dad. Agents regularly checked our safety, but never told us anything about Dad. Every 6 months, a nondescript man in a gray suit would come, introduce himself as a social worker, and inquire about our affairs. Mom answered monosyllabically, and after his departure was always depressed. She tried to ask about her husband, but got the standard answer that information about other program participants was not disclosed. Once, when I was 14, I accidentally overheard Mom talking to this agent. She begged him to say something, whether David was alive, healthy, happy. The agent coldly replied that her job was to take care of her own safety, not to be interested in the fate of others. After that conversation, Mom locked herself in the bathroom and cried so hard I got scared. I knocked on the door, asked her to come out, but she just repeated that everything was fine, just a headache. Now I understand. She was crying from helplessness, from the impossibility of learning the fate of her dearest person. When I turned 18, Mom first spoke about how I had the right to know more about my origins. She said there were things she couldn't tell a small child, but now I was old enough. I held my breath, thinking I would finally learn family secrets. But that same day, an agent came and reminded her that the program was still in effect. 2 of the 3 convicted were still alive. Mom realized she would have to keep the secret for many more years. She just smiled sadly and said that someday I would learn the whole truth about our family. Then I decided Mom meant some romantic story of meeting Dad or family traditions I had forgotten due to my young age. I could never have imagined the scale of the secret she carried. When I married Brad, Mom was happy, but I saw sadness in her eyes. At the wedding, she stared for a long time at the empty seat in the first row, where the bride's father should have sat. All day she held up bravely, but in the evening I found her crying in the garden. Mom said she just regretted that Dad couldn't share this day with us. Then I thought she was missing her dead husband. Now I understand. She was crying because somewhere a man lived who didn't know his daughter was getting married. When Emily was born, and then Jake. Mom was a wonderful grandmother. But sometimes I noticed how she looked thoughtfully at the children and whispered something. She said she was praying for them, asking angels to protect her grandchildren. Actually, she was mentally telling Dad about the birth of his grandchildren, describing their appearance, character, first words. Emily looks very much like Mom in her youth, and Jake is a copy of Dad from childhood photos. When Mom first saw Jake, she cried so hard I got scared. She said the child reminded her of someone very dear. Now I understand. She saw in her grandson the features of the husband she had lost 30 years ago. Mom often took the children to the cemetery to Dad's grave. Emily and Jake got used to these visits, considered them a normal family tradition. Mom told them about the grandfather they had never seen, showed photos, read poems. But now I understand that these visits were Mom's way of maintaining a connection with Dad. She brought his grandchildren to the symbolic grave and mentally imagined how he would have rejoiced looking at them. Every story about grandfather was a message to a person who could be alive somewhere far away. Only in 2023, when the last of the killers died in prison, was the program officially completed. Mom received a letter from the Marshal's Service notifying her that the threat no longer existed. In the same letter was an agent's phone number and an offer to help search for other family members. But Mom was already seriously ill. Cancer was progressing. Treatment wasn't helping. She understood she had little time and agonized over the choice. Tell me the truth and destroy my familiar world, or take the secret to her grave. She consulted with doctors about how much time she had left. Learning that it was a matter of months, not years, Mom made her decision. She couldn't deprive me of the chance to find Dad, couldn't let him spend his whole life considering us dead. In the last weeks of her life, Mom often asked to be left alone. She rehearsed the conversation with me, chose words to explain 30 years of deception. Several times she started talking about the past, but stopped at the last moment, not finding the strength to cause me pain. When Mom told me about the safety deposit box in her final days, she cried not only from physical pain. She understood I would learn about 32 years of deception, that I would realize my entire childhood was built on lies. But she hoped I would forgive her when I learned the whole truth. Mom died without knowing if I could find the strength to open that safety deposit box. She entrusted me with the most important secret of her life and could only hope I would make the right decision. After opening the box and familiarizing myself with the documents, my life was completely turned upside down. Every day brought new discoveries about myself, about family, about who I should have been. I spent hours studying photos from our house in Boston, trying to remember anything from that life. In one photo, I'm swinging on swings in a yard with a white fence. Dad is pushing me, and I'm laughing with my hands raised to the sky. In another, Mom and I are feeding ducks in the park while Dad photographs us. A happy family that didn't know their world would collapse in a few months. I was especially struck by a photo from my second birthday. I'm sitting in a high chair. my whole face covered in cake, while my parents look at me adoringly. Dad holds a teddy bear in his hands, the same one he carried through 32 years of separation. I showed these photos to Brad, and he couldn't believe that before him was proof of his wife's completely different life. The person he had loved for 15 years turned out not to be who he thought. My childhood, which I had told him about, was false. My family history, fiction. Brad experienced this crisis in his own way. He felt he had married a stranger, that our children were grandchildren of a person we considered dead. It took him time to accept the new reality, to understand that I remained the same Lisa, just with a different past. Emily and Jake reacted to the news each in their own way. Emily, who was 8 then, perceived the appearance of a living grandfather as an exciting adventure. For her, it was like a fairy tale. A grandfather everyone thought was dead turned out to be alive and waiting for a meeting somewhere far away. Jake, who was 5, was more concerned about practical things. He asked if grandfather would come to his birthday. Would he give gifts? Did he know how to play soccer? For him, grandfather from the photos became a real person you could touch and play with. The hardest thing was explaining to the children why grandmother never told the truth. Emily couldn't understand for a long time how you could lie about such an important thing for 30 years. I tried to explain about bad people who could cause harm, but for an 8-year-old child, this sounded like a scary fairy tale. Jake accepted the explanation more simply. Grandmother wanted to protect the family from evil people, so she hid grandfather very far away. Now the evil people were dead, and grandfather could be found. Child logic proved more sensible than adult doubts. When I called Agent Cole, my heart beat so hard, I was afraid I would lose consciousness. I dialed the number several times and hung up, not finding the courage to speak. What if they told me Dad was also dead? What if in 32 years he had forgotten about us and didn't want to meet? Agent Cole turned out to be a middle-aged woman with a soft voice. She patiently listened to my story, asked several questions to confirm my identity, and then said words that changed everything. My father was indeed alive, living in Dallas under the name Peter Johnson, and had also recently contacted services looking for family. But the agent warned about complications. In 32 years, Dad had built a new life. He had a wife, Karen, who knew nothing about his past, and 12-year-old twin sons. For them, he had always been Peter Johnson, an auto mechanic who had lost his first family in a car accident many years ago. The agent explained that reunification needed to be approached very carefully. You couldn't just call and say, "Hi, this is your daughter who didn't die 32 years ago." Everyone involved needed to be prepared. The situation explained, time given for comprehension. The first few days after talking to the agent, I lived as if in a fog. Knowing that Dad was alive and located just a few states away was simultaneously joyful and frightening. I checked my phone 100 times a day, expecting a call that would change my life forever. The agent warned that first Dad needed to be prepared for the news. He would be told there was information about the fate of his first family, and if he was ready to hear it, he would get details. This process could take several days or even weeks. No one could be rushed in such a delicate matter. I imagined how Dad received this call. Was he sitting in his auto shop, repairing another car? Or at home, helping the twins with homework? How would he react to news that the family he had mourned for 32 years might be alive? The agent told me a little about his life in Texas. Peter Johnson owned a small auto shop, was known in the area as an honest and skilled mechanic. He married Karen in 1998. She worked at the local school. The twins, Alex and Sam, were good students, interested in sports and music. Outwardly, it was an ordinary middle-class American family. None of the neighbors and friends suspected that Peter kept such a terrible secret inside. He was an exemplary husband and father, but part of his soul always remained in 1991, in that last day when he and Mom were a family. A week after my first call, Agent Cole called back. Dad had agreed to hear information about his family. When he was told that Dorothy and Lisa Morgan might be alive, he didn't believe it at first. Then he demanded proof, details that only our family knew. The agent gave him several facts from my childhood that I had remembered from photos. About the teddy bear I slept with. About how we fed ducks in Boston Park. About my habit of falling asleep only when Dad sang a lullaby about a princess and dragon. When Dad heard these details, he cried. No one except our family could know such intimate details. He realized a miracle had really happened. We were alive. The daughter he had considered dead for 32 years had grown up, married, had children, and was now looking for him. But the joy of reunification was overshadowed by the pain of losing Mom. When Dad learned that Dorothy had died a month ago, he sobbed like a child. He had lost her twice, first thinking she had died in a car accident, now learning she was really dead and they would never meet again. The agent told me that Dad couldn't speak from grief for several hours. For 32 years, he had dreamed of meeting his wife, imagined how they would embrace, how he would ask forgiveness for not being able to protect the family. And now, when the possibility of reunification appeared, it turned out to be too late. But sorrow for Mom mixed with incredible joy that his daughter was alive. Dad asked the agent to tell him everything about my life. Where I studied, what I did for work, how I looked now, was I married, did I have children? Every detail was precious to him, since he had missed my entire life. When the agent said he had grandchildren, 8-year-old Emily and 5-year-old Jake, Dad couldn't believe it. He was a grandfather, but had never known about it. Somewhere, children were growing up with his blood flowing through them, but they considered him dead. The most difficult thing was telling Dad's family about the reunification. Karen and the twins were used to thinking that Peter was a widower who had lost his family in his youth. The sudden appearance of a living daughter destroyed everything they had believed for the last 24 years. Karen perceived the news as betrayal. For a quarter century, she had been married to a man who hid the most important part of his life. She felt deceived, betrayed, used. How could you wake up next to a woman every day knowing you had another daughter you had lost? The twins, Alex and Sam, reacted in a teenage way, with curiosity and some skepticism. For them, it sounded like a movie plot. They suddenly had a 35-year-old sister whose existence they knew nothing about. It was cool and strange at the same time. Dad tried to explain to his family about the witness protection program, about the prohibition against talking about the past, but the words sounded unconvincing. How do you explain to children that Dad had lived with a secret for 24 years that could destroy their family? How do you explain to a wife that love for her was real, despite lies about the past? Karen felt she had married a stranger. The person she had lived the best years of her life with turned out to be completely different from who she thought. Peter or David? Whom had she loved all these years? And whom did he love more, His first family or second? The agent suggested organizing gradual acquaintance. First phone conversations, then exchanging photos, and only then a personal meeting. Everyone needed time to get used to the new reality, especially the children on both sides. Our first phone conversation lasted 3 hours. We both cried, laughed, tried to fit 32 years of separation into a few hours. Dad told me about my childhood that I had forgotten, and I told him about the life he had missed. He remembered how I learned to walk, holding on to his fingers, how I first said the word daddy, how we built sand castles on the beach, and I always demanded that the princess have a unicorn. These memories were a revelation to me. I recognized myself in stories about an unfamiliar child. I told him about school, university, work as a nurse, meeting Brad, the birth of children. Every detail was precious to him. He greedily absorbed information about the life he couldn't share, about grandchildren he had never seen. When I described Emily and Jake to him, Dad cried. Emily looked like my mom as a child, the same curly hair and green eyes. And Jake was a copy of Dad himself, judging by childhood photos. Genetics had manifested through 2 generations, connecting us with invisible threads. Dad told me about the twins, Alex and Sam. Alex was serious, interested in mathematics and chess, dreamed of becoming an engineer. Sam was more sociable, played on the school basketball team, loved music. Both studied well and helped Dad in the auto shop on weekends. We exchanged photos through the agent. I sent pictures of the children, our family, the house in Portland. Dad sent photos of his shop, house in Dallas, the twins in school uniforms. It was strange, receiving family photos from strangers who were simultaneously the closest relatives. Emily and Jake enthusiastically examined photos of their twin uncles. They were especially amazed that Alex and Sam were absolutely identical. Even I couldn't distinguish them in the pictures. The children asked me to tell them about their uncles, made plans for meeting, dreamed of playing basketball with them. Brad also studied the photos, trying to understand what kind of people his children would become if they had this family's genes. Alex reminded him of Jake in the future, the same serious look and inclination toward exact sciences. And Sam was like Emily, open, sociable, artistic. Karen didn't agree to a phone conversation with me for a long time. She was afraid she would feel jealousy or hostility toward me. In her understanding, I was a ghost from the past who threatened to destroy her family. But Dad convinced her that meeting would help understand the situation better. Our conversation with Karen was tense and delicate at the same time. I understood her feelings. Learning that your husband had hidden the existence of a daughter for a quarter century was a blow. But I tried to explain that Dad wasn't to blame for circumstances that forced him to stay silent. Karen asked many questions about Mom, about our family life before separation. She needed to understand what woman her husband had loved before her, whether she was competing with the memory of his first wife. When I told her that Mom had never remarried, Karen calmed down a little. Gradually, Karen began to understand the scale of sacrifice her husband had made. For 24 years, he had carried the pain of loss inside, having no right to share it even with his closest person. Every day he woke up thinking about his lost daughter, but had to pretend to be a happy family man. Alex and Sam approached the situation more simply. For teenagers, the appearance of an adult sister was an intriguing event. They asked Dad about the time when he was young, about that life that had always been shrouded in mystery. Alex, the more analytical of the twins, asked many questions about the witness protection program. He was interested in how you could live under a false name, how new documents were created, how the past was hidden. For him, it was almost a scientific problem. Sam was more interested in the human side of the story. How did Dad cope with the pain? What did he feel thinking about his dead daughter? Why had he never talked about her? Sam was more emotional than his brother and more easily accepted the idea of an extended family. The week before the meeting, I barely slept. I imagined this moment hundreds of times, how I would see Dad, what I would say, how he would react to his grandchildren. Emily and Jake were also worried, constantly asking what grandfather was like, whether he was kind, whether he would love them. Brad worried in his own way. He understood that the meeting could change our family dynamics forever. Until now, he had been the only male figure in the children's lives, and now a grandfather with a rich, though tragic history would appear. On the plane to Denver, I looked through childhood photos, trying to find in that 3-year-old child something that would help me recognize Dad. Emily sat next to me, asking endless questions about grandfather. Jake fell asleep, clutching a drawing he had made especially for grandfather. The hotel in Denver seemed like neutral territory, but the atmosphere was tense. Agent Cole met us in the lobby and escorted us to the conference room where the meeting was to take place. She explained that first only Dad and I would meet, and then the others would join. When the door opened and Dad entered, time seemed to stop. Before me stood a gray-haired man of about 60, with tired eyes and a mechanic's calloused hands. He looked older than his years, the result of years of hard work and emotional pain. But when he smiled, I recognized him. In that smile was something familiar, something I remembered from earliest childhood. He carefully approached, as if afraid I would disappear if he made a sudden movement. We stood facing each other, not knowing what to do. Hug? Shake hands? How do a father and daughter behave when meeting after 32 years of separation? The agent tactfully moved to the window, giving us a chance to get comfortable. Dad was first to extend his arms, and I stepped toward him. His embrace smelled of machine oil and old cologne, and suddenly a vague memory surfaced. That's exactly how it smelled when he hugged me as a child. We both cried, unable to say a word. He had brought with him an old, worn suitcase, and when he opened it, I realized that my entire lost life fit in this small box. The teddy bear I slept with at age 3, now faded and worn from time. Children's drawings made with crayons, houses, sun, human figures labeled Daddy, Mommy, Lisa. A lock of my hair, carefully wrapped in thin paper. My first shoes, tiny white boots with pink laces. A photo from my 2nd birthday where I'm sitting in a high chair, my whole face covered in chocolate cake. Each item told a story about the child I had been, about the family we once were. Dad had kept these relics for 32 years, like sacred objects. In the hardest moments, he would take out the box and go through the contents, mentally talking to his dead daughter. He told me stories about each item. The bear was named Bruno, and I couldn't fall asleep without him. My first shoes Mom bought for my birthday photo session. The drawings I made every Sunday and solemnly presented to my parents as the greatest works of art. Gradually, the children joined us. Emily shyly entered the room, holding Jake's hand. They had only seen grandfather in old photos, and now this gray stranger was supposed to become part of their family. Dad crouched down to be at the children's level and spoke in that special voice adults use with little ones. Emily cautiously approached closer, studying his face, looking for resemblance to the photos. Jake hid behind his sister, but curiosity overcame shyness. Grandfather showed the children the contents of his magic suitcase. Emily was mesmerized looking at Mommy's childhood drawings, and Jake hugged the old teddy bear with delight. Dad told stories about what their mother was like as a child, and the children listened with bated breath. Brad stood aside, watching the reunion scene. For him, this was also difficult, accepting into the family a person who had the right to special relationships with his wife and children. But seeing the joy in Emily and Jake's eyes, he understood this was right. When Karen and the twins joined us, the atmosphere became more tense. Two families connected by one person met for the first time. Karen looked wary, the twins curious, and we all felt the awkwardness of the situation. Alex and Sam turned out to be tall teenagers with serious faces. They politely said hello, but kept their distance. For them, I wasn't a sister, but rather an interesting phenomenon, an adult woman who suddenly appeared in their lives. Emily and Jake curiously examined their twin uncles. Children adapt to new circumstances faster, and soon they were showing Alex and Sam their drawings, telling them about school and friends. Karen remained cold but correct. She understood the importance of the moment for her husband, but couldn't yet accept the new reality. For her, I was a reminder that a quarter-century of their marriage was built on things left unsaid. Agent Cole skillfully directed the conversation, helping everyone feel more comfortable. She suggested each family tell about themselves, their traditions, interests. Gradually, the ice began to melt. People began to see in each other not a threat, but an opportunity. By the end of the day, the tension had noticeably decreased. The children played together. Adults exchanged contacts and made plans for future meetings. We agreed to stay in touch through video calls and plan joint holidays. The farewell was touching. Dad hugged me for a long time, as if afraid this was all a dream and he would lose his daughter again. Emily and Jake promised Grandfather to call regularly and tell him about their school successes. On the plane home, I reflected on what had happened. In one day, we had transformed from a family of 4 into an extended family of 9. Ahead was long work building relationships, accepting each other, creating new traditions. The first months after the meeting were a period of active communication. We called each other every week, exchanged photos and letters. Dad greedily absorbed information about our daily life. I learned about his work, about the problems and joys of his family. Karen gradually warmed up. She began to understand that I wasn't claiming her place in her husband's life, but simply wanted to restore the connection with my father. Our conversations became warmer. We discussed children, shared maternal experiences. The twins also warmed up in communication. Alex helped Emily with math through video connection, and Sam told Jake about basketball. The children quickly found common ground despite the age difference. The first joint holiday, Thanksgiving, we celebrated in Portland. At one table sat people who 6 months earlier didn't know about each other's existence. Brad and Karen discussed the complexities of blended families. The twins adored their older cousins, and Dad sat looking at all his children together, a sight he had dreamed of for 32 years. He told me stories about my early childhood, and some memories began to return. The swings with the white fence, the smell of his cologne when he hugged me before bed, how we built sandcastles on the beach, fragments of a life that had been stolen from us by circumstances. Gradually, we began building new family traditions, joint vacations, regular meetings, a shared family chat. Dad moved closer to Portland to see his grandchildren more often. He taught Alex and Sam to fix cars, as he once planned to teach me. And I helped Karen with medical questions. After all, my nursing profession came from Mom. A year after our reunion, I officially changed my name to Morgan Thompson. Emily wrote a school essay, How I Found My Grandfather, and won first place in a competition. Jake proudly told friends he had twin uncles from Texas. But most importantly, I finally understood the sacrifice my parents had made. Mom lived 32 years with a broken heart, but raised me in love and safety. Dad carried the pain of loss for 32 years, but built a new family without stopping loving the old one. They gave up their happiness so I could live. The Witness Protection Program separated our family for 32 years. But love, it turned out, is stronger than any programs. We lost years we could have spent together, but we found each other again. And now we have a future, a big, complicated, but real family. Every time I look at that music box, I think about Mom. She took with her the pain of 32 years of separation, but left me the key to real life. The key to a father I thought was dead. The key to a family I didn't know existed. Sometimes I wonder, how would our lives have turned out if that night in March 1991, Dad hadn't looked out the window? Would we have lived as an ordinary family in Boston? Would I have grown up with a father? Would Emily and Jake have had grandparents? But then I look at our family photos now, at the faces of Karen, Alex, and Sam, who wouldn't have been in our lives, at Brad, who accepted this whole crazy story and supported me, at the joy in Dad's eyes when he plays with his grandchildren. Maybe life turned out exactly as it was supposed to. We lost many years, but gained many more people we love. Family isn't just blood. It's people who stay with you no matter what, who wait 32 years not knowing if they'll see each other again, who accept the truth no matter how shocking it might be. Mom didn't just leave me a key to a safety deposit box. She left me the key to a real family. And now I know. Some doors are worth opening, even if you don't know what's waiting behind them.